Hello and welcome to the guest show. You might notice I seem to be speaking for those on YouTube from San Francisco. Yes, no, I'm trying to change backgrounds. Design when it doesn't seem to work, but I will eventually. Now, today I've got a very special person here, one I have great respect for. I have great respect for most people, but this person, I met him in 2008 when I joined Cardboard Citizens. And he's an authority on a certain type of theatre that I'm very keen on. And he was founder of Cardboard Citizens. Welcome, Mr. Adrian Jackson.
Thank you, Ian. Lovely to see you as always.
Yeah. So, Adrian, why not go over the history of why you founded Cardboard Citizens? Because we're going to talk about homelessness.
Okay, well, I mean, to compress it, so I became aware of the work of a Brazilian man called Augusto Boal, who invented something called the Theatre of the Oppressed, as you know. And I invited him to teach, to come to this country and do some teaching. I was working at that time for a theatre company called London Bubble. And he came, and before he came, we thought it would be a good idea to trial his ideas, the training that he was going to give as quickly as possible after he left. So even before he came, we had set up a project working with homeless people to trial this form of theatre called Forum Theatre. Um, the fact that it was homeless people of all the oppressed groups we could have chosen was really down to a number of factors. It was the early 90s. Homelessness was very in your face. It was on the news a certain amount. Various government ministers spoke about stepping over homeless people on their way to the opera. And I also had on my team at that time somebody who had experience working in that sector. And finally, though this didn't occur to me then, Ian, it only occurred to me a lot later. Though I have never been homeless, I did reside in a number of other people's homes from the age of about 15 onwards when my mother died, and I couldn't live with my father because he was an alcoholic. And so I suppose I had a fairly natural affinity for people who had been displaced. So that's the long story short. That's sort of roughly how. And we did that initial project, which was over a number of months, and it went very well. Everybody found it interesting. I found it interesting. And then we sat down with the group of people we had recruited and said, "You fancy doing more?" And they said, "Yeah, why not?" So that was how Cardboard Citizens started in a nutshell.
Yeah, because just for people's information, when you say you were, and I'm going to use the term they use because homelessness has got several different areas. Everybody thinks I'm about sleeping, but you were what they call sofa surfing as such.
I wasn't sofa surfing. I
No.
had beds and I lodged with families.
Yeah,
I
but
was
you
at
were,
school and I lodged with other families, and it I was secure. So I don't want to make too much of an analogy
hmm,
to the actual physical circumstances, but I think something about the fact of not being in one's own home and not having all those supports around one probably did seep into me and
hmm.
color my life.
Well, I remember that first year that I joined in 2008. In 2009, I went on the hostel tour, which ended up in Austria, if you may remember.
Yeah, yeah.
Several shows there. And I think it might be interesting to those who don't know if you give a short précis of what forum theatre is.
Okay, well, forum theatre essentially, you make a play like any other play, except that it tends to follow a central character, a protagonist in the jargon, and various things happen to them. They tend to be confronting oppression of some kind or other, and they struggle against it, as one does, and they fail bravely to overcome the oppression facing them. This piece of theatre is then placed in front of an audience who have similar experiences. In our case, people who have been homeless and so on. And the audience is then invited, after the play has been completed, to suggest how things might have come out differently if the protagonist, the central character, had done something different, had chosen another course of action. So that opens into a period of the evening called the Forum, where many people, improbable as it might sound, come on stage, take the central character's place, and enact what they think might be a useful solution. Some things work, some things don't work. A lot of information is shared, a lot of laughter is shared. Sometimes very practical information is shared, often tactical information, strategies are shared, and that's forum theatre.
I must admit, I'm going to say to you, I might have mentioned this once before. I think forum theatre is the perfect platform for debate and awareness of these things.
Well, it's Augusto Boal, the founder, called it a theatrical debate. So you're absolutely right to call it a debate. It's a debate in action, if you like. And perhaps that reaches people who wouldn't normally participate in a debate if it was just words. Perhaps it's more fun in certain senses. Perhaps it's more entertaining than a dry debate would be. But I agree, of course, you don't need to convince me. I think it's a very powerful way of getting a group of people with a shared experience or shared interest to come together and share ideas.
I was later on, as you know, more a support person. But that first year, I was lucky to be part of the.
You were thrown in the deep end, if I
Yeah,
remember, Ian. You
I
were right in
was.
the show. And so you experienced that from the point of view of the actors, so the audience coming on stage and trying ideas, which of course you had no idea what they were going to do, which is very exciting. So you're thrown back onto pure improvisation.
Which is where I came from originally.
Which is where you came from, of course, which is your
But I do remember you were saying that. I remember that there was a church near Euston Station. We were doing a show there. I don't think you were there that evening. And I remember.
Yes, I know, across the road from the station. Yeah, big church, yeah.
And I do remember that I always sat at the back in case somebody went for anything. It was my caring nature, I suppose. And I saw somebody, she stood up and she walked out. So if I just check on her, she was sitting on the staircase. And I asked, was she okay? And she says, it's too close. And I think that's the power of what forum theatre does. It brings reality to the world.
I think it's important that you complete that story and say that she subsequently came back in.
Yes.
So it is powerful because it does touch people really quite personally. Some people might worry that it would trigger people in the modern jargon. But in my experience, it's mainly a beneficial effect because if people have had those experiences, it's nice for them to see that this is not a unique experience. They're not entirely alone in having had that difficult experience. And B, it allows them the opportunity to look at it and revisit it and consider other possibilities. So broadly speaking, though it's not framed as a therapeutic technique, I think most of the time it is therapeutic for the audience, for the individual member and for the audience as a group.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question. Now, you probably saw Alan Bates in the Post Office, which is very well written, I think.
Wonderful.
brilliantly
Wonderful.
written, acted as well, but the timeline, as you know, was contracted. And really that happens in Thorn Theatre. My question to you would be this is, and I think I know the answer. Should theatre be given this sort of message?
Be giving the sort of
The
message.
sort of experiences, sharing the experiences that people like that lady at the church can go through and become, it is therapeutic to see these things. But it should
Well,
be.
I think theatre has always fulfilled an important function in society in different measures at different times in different contexts. And I think essentially it's always been a form of therapy. Um, so the Greeks spoke about catharsis, which they meant as the voiding of difficult feelings, as it were, because you see your representative on stage, the protagonist in a Greek drama, goes through the things which you're going through on your behalf. So that function of theatre has absolutely always been there. Do I think the theatre should tackle these subjects? Absolutely, I do. Theatre and film. And you mentioned the Alan Bates thing. It was remarkable. It was remarkable. Why did that work? Because most people probably knew, a lot of people knew about that story. A lot of people, of course, didn't. So, number one, it brought that story to the awareness of a huge amount of people. But because it was a film, because it was, people acting the parts, it brought a human dimension to it, which really forced people to think about what a egregious act of injustice had been committed against these poor, wrongly imprisoned postmasters. So I think that was a classic example. People tend to think of theatre and entertainment as being sort of rather periphery, rather frivolous, just to keep us off, keep our minds off real life. And it can sometimes be that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it can also be absolutely at the center of triggering a public debate about something which really needs to happen. And that was one of those examples. And what was really lovely about that example, of course, is that it really led to real change, which is our dream with forum theatre, not necessarily on such a huge scale, but that it could engender change on an individual and societal level from audiences who see it and participate in it. So, I mean, as you know, Augusto Boal was interested in change. That's what he wanted to achieve.
I remember you gave saying I was there when you were talking about his original idea, how he met somebody, was it a woman? And he thought, I'm going to do something about change.
Well, the origin story of Forum Theatre is too long for this podcast, but essentially, what really happened was he was making a kind of theatre called agit-prop, which is short for agitational propaganda, which is very popular in the 70s and early 80s, if you like, where you have a message and you want to use theatre to disseminate that message. So the last time, perhaps in our lifetime, this agit-prop really had a major function was during the miners' strike. But the thing about agit-prop is that it's a one-way transmission, and it tells an audience what the company producing it think. And by implication, it also tells an audience what they ought to think. It wants to convert people, to move people to its cause. The story Boal told was of presenting a play a little bit like that, but somebody came on stage and took over the part rather than talking about it. And it became more of a debate. I mean, that's a terribly truncated version of actually two stories joined together, but essentially, yeah, that's it. And Boal became interested in a participatory theatre as a way of engendering change, because he thought it was more effective than if you like, people being told what to do, that they came together as a group of people to a set of decisions or opinions, and that was then a much more powerful imperative for change.
Right, but I should say that about the Alan Bates thing. In 2015, there was a doc. I found it after seeing it. I watched it on television. I thought, hold a minute, this is real. And then I did some research and I found in 2015, Panorama did a documentary about it. Nothing was done. And it had to be the theatre, we call it theatre, or a story presented in a theatrical way,
Yeah,
more effect.
yeah. Well, interestingly, after the Alan Bates drama, don't know if you remember, but a number of years later, I think in 2009, I did a play about the Chagos Islanders,
I
which was
remember
the
that,
story,
yeah.
I remember that, called A Few Man Fridays, which was also the story of a terrible injustice. So shortly after the Alan Bates drama was screened on TV, I was contacted by people involved in that drama, to talk about making the equivalent television version of our play as a way of again bringing it to public attention. It didn't happen, but and I think everybody with any cause in the world was thinking at that time, I want to do a post office drama because it's had such an effect. But yes, so interesting.
Well, as we know, lots of things go through in the planning stage, they never appear,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah.
Now, you contacted me 2 months ago when you were in America, and
Right,
you mentioned homelessness in America. What's the difference
right.
between here and there, would you say?
I can't speak about America because it's a huge country, but
But where you were,
I can speak about the part where I was, which is Minneapolis. So I was invited to Minneapolis to make a play with a homeless theatre company there called Zamia, wonderful group of people, not completely unlike Cardboard Citizens, very diverse group of people, very committed. Um, and the subject really they wanted to talk about was the encampments. So in Minneapolis and in a number of other cities, most homeless people actually live in kind of tent cities, not completely unlike the original Cardboard City from which our company, Cardboard Citizens, drew its name. And these encampments can be like 200 people, 100, 200 people in an area. And they pitch up at a vacant lot and they pitch up their tents and then they are tolerated by the authorities for a matter of months at most before they are then moved on. So this is the modern phenomenon of homelessness in America, these sort of tent cities. It's my experience was in this country, a lot of homeless people, as you know, as you experienced yourself, I think, live in hostels. There seem to be far less hostels, far fewer hostels in certainly in Minneapolis. Really, the few that there were run by people like the Salvation Army on a vast scale, and they weren't everybody's cup of tea. So many homeless people actually found it much more pleasant, certainly convenient, to stay in tents with a group of people who were having similar experiences. So this is a thing. I mean, actually, while I was there, a case went to the Supreme Court in America of of a municipality moving on this as such an encampment, and whether that was actually legal or not. And it was a bit of a split decision in the end. It's going to go further. But yes, that's the difference. I mean, I have seen that a few times in the past decade, particularly in Manchester. And of course, you and I will see people living in tents around town or on a railway siding or in woods or whatever. But in that sort of massed formation of a cardboard city, which that's essentially what we had when in 1992, when we started cardboard sets. Um, that's not been a thing in this country really on the same scale. Maybe it'll come. Who knows? I don't know. Um,
I know that, actually they were saying around the time you contacted me, something appeared from the Supreme Court giving the people the right to actually burn down the tents. I don't know if that ever happened or not.
I
But in
don't
this,
think I don't think there was a tent burning thing, but I'm trying to remember. I want to say it's a place called Rapid Falls or something like that. I'm just Googling it. Um, and it was more about it's more about the responsibilities of the yes, okay, it was yeah, sorry.
that's okay.
Grants Pass. It was a place called Grants Pass.
Mm,
Uh, and the Supreme Court ruled, and this was must have been in July or June, I think, that people without homes can be arrested and fined for sleeping in public spaces, overturning a lower court's ruling that enforcing camping bans when shelter is lacking is cruel and unusual punishment. So the Supreme Court, the lower court, um, came out in favor of the homeless people living there, and the Supreme Court denied that. Um, so it's still really in motion, as I
mm.
understand.
Well, in this country, I got on the street in 2006, and the only time I heard of a tent then was I used to go and sign on at the job centre in Victoria. Guy came on because I was what they call personal issue, and he said to me, I've got a tent in Epping Forest. I don't want to change my address. That's other hassle. I come up here to get my gyro. I never heard it. And then all of a sudden, I think, as you know, I've been on the street twice more. The second time's when I start seeing tents. And now
Yeah,
they're talking about, the Marble Arch underpass near Speaker's Corner, where a lot of people just sleep, I know, during the night. Now they're talking about they're going to move the tents in there.
well, I mean, yes. So in Stratford, Stratford East Centre, the big shopping centre there's a
Mm,
vast homeless population every night, um, making their own arrangements. So yeah, these things come up. I mean, they're of course just a terrible indictment of society's complete failure to accommodate people with basic human rights. They're a visible sign of society's failure.
what would you say? And I'll call you an expert witness, for example. All right. How can we show it in the theatrical terms? How would you portray it in theatrical terms?
Well, you just have to tell these stories. And I mean, the piece we made in America told for a fairly mixed audience, which included a lot of homeless people. The show, there's about 200 people there, which is great. Um, and the idea was also to see whether we could work on the piece to make a piece of legislative theatre. Theatre would actually affect legal change. But it was really a matter of just telling the stories. And so, you walk past a homeless person on the street, most people don't stop. Most people don't know how that person got there, what had happened to them. And so it's same with these I mean, people tend to keep non-homeless people tend to keep away from them, tend to keep a wide berth. They're a little bit frightened of them, like Cardboard City was. I mean, the Cardboard City, there were two Cardboard Cities in London in 91, 92. One was in the Bull Ring, which was the underpass at Waterloo, on the site where there is now the IMAX cinema.
Mm.
And the other one was in Lincoln's Inn Field. And both of those encampments, they were encampments, had about 200 people in them. The one in Lincoln's Inn Field was much more tent oriented, and the one, of course, in the underpass, there was shelter from the concrete. Where was I going with that thought?
I was asking you, how can we show this in a theatrical?
Yes, well, just that people, there's just one of the basic functions of theatre can be to tell stories which people otherwise wouldn't hear. So just telling their story about how people ended up here, and what life was like living in these conditions, and so on and so on. So to make it less easy, perhaps, for people just to walk past or cross the road or whatever. Yeah.
I'll show you a slight story about mine. Before I joined Cardboard, I had a doorstep on Chancery Lane. I never did tents or night shelters. And I remember waking up one morning, and really all I want, the old-fashioned family run out of charge. I want to know the time. And
say it again.
I want to know the time. That's all.
You want to know the time?
It was obvious, it must have been about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, but I just wanted to know. And I asked, and I would say virtually people rushed past where I was and slowed down when they passed me, which I think is a terrible indictment of people.
Well, people were afraid that you were asking them for money, and all you were
Probably.
asking was the time. And yeah, well, that must have been a terrible experience. And I'm so glad you have managed to remove yourself from that position.
But many people are vulnerable. It's like, I know that I speak to a guy, well, I haven't spoken to him for a while, but this guy works for Emmaus, if you know the charity.
Yeah.
He's now a manager of Emmaus. He was an ex-rough sleeper. And we were talking a few years ago about this, and he still dreams of being back on the street. And I think anybody who does have that nightmare.
Right. I'm sure it haunts you. Yeah. Yeah.
Adrian, finally, now I know you've moved on. How would anybody be able to contact you? Are you doing workshops to introduce forum or religious?
I am doing various things. I'm doing various projects. So the best place for people to contact me is on the STOP website, which is School of Theatre of the Oppressed, London.
Oh.
STOP London is what you put into stop.london and .co.uk, and that's the place to find me. So we're doing workshops teaching people forum theatre and Rainbow of Desires and legislative theatre and various things. And yeah, get in touch. And that's also a way to find me for the individual projects that I'm doing. You can also find me at Adrian Jackson, without the C in Jackson, at gmail.com.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
But what I'll do, Adrian, if you could send me the link to start.
Yeah. Great.
It's be going out next Monday, actually.
Right. Cool.
I'll put it on the writing.
Great.
But
Great.
thank you very much, Adrian.
Well, really nice to talk to you, Ian. Sorry, I'm so absent-minded, but I hope it's okay. I hope I didn't waste too much of your time. Really nice to talk to you. Yeah. I hope the weather is good in Los Angeles.
Well, it is. It's in San Francisco. Don't forget.
San Francisco.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that was Adrian Jackson. What I'll do is when he's recording will be out. Well, I'm doing it on a Monday, the following Monday, and I'll put I'll put the link to the website and also Adrian's email if he gives me permission. So that's the guest show. Always every week something different. And if you're interested, you always contact me on my email. I'll put my email down below. Thank you. And also you can either see my good looks on YouTube, which is a new thing. I've got a channel on YouTube, or the audio. So I wish you a pleasant week, everybody.
Same to you, Ian. Thank you. Bye. Bye.